This time last year, the world lost a giant, not just of boxing, but of American culture. George Foreman's life was a saga of reinvention, from troubled kid to Olympic champion, from feared heavyweight to beloved comeback king, from preacher to global entrepreneur. His story carried triumph, controversy, faith, and a legacy big enough to outlive the man himself. Tonight, we look back at the life, the impact, and the final chapter of a legend who refused to stay down.
Flashback.
This time last year, the world said goodbye to a man who lived more than one lifetime in a single body. George Foreman, Olympic champion, heavyweight king, preacher, entrepreneur, and one of the most recognizable names in American culture, died on March 21st, 2025, at the age of 76. His death marked the end of a story defined by reinvention, resilience, and a kind of second-act magic that almost no one else has ever pulled off. George Edward Foreman was born in Marshall, Texas, in 1949, raised in poverty, and shaped by a childhood that could have easily swallowed him whole. He was a street fighter, runaway, a kid who felt the world was stacked against him. Everything changed when he entered the Job Corps, a government program that introduced him to boxing and, in many ways, saved his life. Within a few years, he was a force. Raw power, heavy hands, a presence that felt almost mythic. In 1968, he won Olympic gold in Mexico City, waving a tiny American flag in the ring, a moment that made him a symbol of pride during a turbulent era. By 1973, he destroyed Joe Frazier in 2 rounds to become heavyweight champion of the world. Foreman wasn't just winning, he was dismantling opponents. He looked invincible. Then came Zaire, the rumble in the jungle, Muhammad Ali, rope-a-dope, and one of the greatest upsets in sports history. Foreman didn't just lose the belt, he lost the aura. The invincible monster had been outsmarted, outlasted, and humbled in front of the world. The years that followed were uneven, a few wins, a few losses, and then a collapse, literally. After a fight, in 1977, Foreman suffered a near-death experience in the locker room. He later described it as a spiritual awakening. Whether people believed him or not, the effect was real. He walked away from boxing. He became a preacher. He opened youth centers. He disappeared from the ring for a decade. Then, at 38 years old, George Foreman announced he was coming back. People laughed. He was older, heavier, slower, and smiling in a way the younger Foreman never did. But the smile was the trick. Behind it was the same granite power. He fought his way back into contention, and in 1994, at 45 years old, wearing the same trunks he'd worn 20 years earlier, he knocked out Michael Moorer to become the oldest heavyweight champion in history. It was one of the greatest comebacks ever recorded in sports. And then came the grill. The George Foreman grill wasn't just a product, it was a cultural phenomenon. Over 100 million units sold, a fortune larger than his boxing earnings. A second legacy built on reinvention, humor, and self-awareness. Foreman's life wasn't without controversy. In 2022, 2 women filed civil lawsuits accusing him of sexual abuse dating back to the 1970s. Foreman denied the allegations, calling them a shakedown. The cases were eventually settled out of court in 2024, with no admission of wrongdoing. The settlements left a complicated footnote in an otherwise celebrated public life. A reminder that icons are still human, and legacies are rarely simple. He also faced criticism for his political stances, his public feuds, and his sometimes abrasive commentary on modern boxing. But Foreman always insisted he was speaking from experience, not ego. George Foreman wasn't just a boxer or a pitchman. He became a symbol of American reinvention. His comeback in the 1990s didn't just inspire athletes. It inspired anyone who'd ever been counted out. He became a fixture on late-night TV, a warm, self-aware presence who leaned into the joke that he'd once been the scariest man alive. He embraced the role of elder statesman, offering advice to young fighters, preaching patience, discipline, and humility, lessons he learned the hard way. And the grill? That wasn't an accident. Foreman understood branding before athletes were expected to. He turned a kitchen appliance into a global empire, earning more from that smiling logo grill than he ever made in the ring. It made him one of the wealthiest retired athletes in the world, and one of the first to prove that athletes could build businesses that outlived their careers. Behind the fame was the preacher. His ministry wasn't a side project. It was the center of his life for decades. He funded youth programs, built community centers, and spent countless hours mentoring kids who reminded him of himself at 15. Angry, directionless, and one bad decision away from disaster. He believed deeply in second chances because he'd lived one, and he never stopped telling people that redemption wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Beyond the ring and the grill, Foreman was known for something else: his enormous family. He had 12 children and 5 sons named George: George Jr., George III, George IV, George V, and George VI. He said he did it so they'd always have something in common. A choice he defended with a grin, saying, "If you're going to name someone after you, why stop at one?" It became a running joke in pop culture, but for Foreman, it was about unity, legacy, and identity. He was also a devoted minister, a mentor to troubled youth, and a man who believed deeply in second chances because he had lived one himself. George Foreman was married 5 times throughout his life. His relationships were as complex and varied as the chapters of his career. His wives were Adrienne Calhoun, his first marriage, from 1971 to 1974. His second wife was Cynthia Lewis. They were married from 1977 to 1979. His third marriage was with Sharon Goodson, from 1981 to 1982. Andrea Skeet was his 4th wife from 1982 to 1985. And finally married Joan Martelli, whom he married in 1985 and remained with for the rest of his life. Martelli was by his side for 4 decades, through his ministry, his comeback, his business empire, and his final years, the steady presence in a life that was anything but quiet. In his final year, Foreman's public appearances slowed. He dealt with long-standing heart issues, the same condition that had nearly killed him in the 1970s. He spent more time with family, more time at his church, and more time reflecting on the improbable arc of his life. When he died on March 21st, 2025, the cause was reported as complications from heart failure. Houston honored him with a public memorial at the Wortham Theater Center. Fans lined the streets. The city he loved said goodbye. This time last year, the world didn't just lose a boxer. It lost a symbol of reinvention. A man who proved that failure isn't final, that second acts are possible, and that a life can be rewritten even after the world thinks it's over. George Foreman's story wasn't perfect, but it was enormous, human, and unforgettable. A fighter, a preacher, a businessman, a father, a man who lived 2 lives and left a legacy big enough for both. May George Foreman rest in paradise. If you were a George Foreman fan, or if you like this series and want to see more of this time last year, please throw me a thumb. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.